Welcome to another episode of Vendhan Show, a show about issues, the history, culture, heritage, and language of the people of South Asia from Washington, in Washington's perspective, for an easier understanding of the people in, you guessed it, Washington. Today, my guest is Dr. Abusaleh Shariff. Dr. Sharif is an economist. He holds his doctorate in economics from Yale. He is the president of US-India Policy Institute here in DC. Dr. Sharif was appointed by Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh, in 2005 to help prepare a comprehensive human development study, specifically for the Indian Muslims who number over 200 million. It was called the Sachar Committee Report, presented to the Indian Parliament in 2007. In that report, Dr. Sharif, along with the Judge Rajinder Sachar, made a few recommendations. One of those recommendations was to create an equal opportunity commission, similar to the Equal Employment Commission in the US. The purpose of this recommendation, according to Dr. Sharif, is to ensure that socially marginalized population does not get left out are left behind in the economic life and growth of the country. Even though this particular report deals with the Indian Muslims primarily, it also highlights the overall state of affairs for the religious and ethnic minority communities in different parts of the Union of India. This report also brings out some fundamental issues there. In this episode, Dr. Sharif argues that the human development measurements he collected using various methods all indicate to a disparity in educational, employment, and the economic status of non-upper caste Hindus in general, and particularly among the Muslims across the Union of India. Though on the face of it, this may seem like an internal issue for India, dealt with the great details supported by tons of data, it has some relevance to the US policymakers as well, because it has the potential to impact the US economic interest in some significant way, if not directly. Though the length of this show exceeds the time limit I would have preferred, I think to get a comprehensive idea on the issue, it would be a good idea to set aside about 40 minutes of your time to understand this matter. Some issues Dr. Sharif talks about could seem like irrelevant, but they are nevertheless needed to underscore some of the important issues he is raising. So let me begin by asking Dr. Sharif, why do you think there is a need for such a study to begin with? Why do you propose to create an equal opportunity commission in India? And how does it matter to us in Washington?
So human development is a concept which emerged in early 90s. The United Nations defined the parameters of this human development. And it basically said at that time that international comparison, should not be done only in terms of the value of money or what is called the per capita income. So what that means is there are many countries where the income, per capita income in the international comparisons can be low, but the quality of life could be high. Reference was given to Sri Lanka, for example, that it had low per capita income, but it had very high human development. And human development here was measured in terms of the healthiness and in terms of education. And within India, Kerala state had a very high human development index, which is almost equivalent to a Western economy. So given this concept of human development, me being a person who conducts focus group discussions, conduct large-scale national surveys, I happened to write the first Human Development Report for India. And when we write Human Development Report, we generally identify the differentials between the outcome measures and differentials by communities, different type of people. In India, we call them in various different ways. Besides the gender, male and female, who have very different human development measures, youth and old have different human development measures in India. There can be differences by various caste groups. India is a larger majority community. Hindu community is divided into various castes and subcastes, and each one of them have access to different levels of access to resources and different levels of human development. Similarly, there are minority.
Now let me interrupt for a quick second there. You mentioned that there is a caste stratification in India, and also you are saying that there are human development index is vastly different between some of these castes. Why is that so?
I'll just jump into that in a second. So besides the caste, there are about 20% of India's population is classified as minorities. The minority word is applied only to religious communities in India. The context of minority is a minority religion. Hindu religion being the majority religion, which is subdivided into hundreds of different castes, the minorities as a whole are identified like Muslim community and the Christian community. These are the two major minorities. And besides this, there are Buddhist, Jains, and Sikh community. Now, Buddhist, Jain, and Sikh community are considered a kind of extension of the Hindu system, whereas it is only the Muslim and the Christian community which is present in India is considered as a kind of alien, the kind of
and to some extent, the Jew, even though they are smaller number, the Jewish population and
there's not much of Jewish, but Zoroastrian population.
Zoroastrians are there.
Zoroastrian population are there are also there. So now, when we are talking of human development, we basically are doing two things. We measure the outcome indicators. What is an outcome indicator? An outcome is what at the moment I possess, I own. For example, I am educated, I'm a graduate, I'm a person who has a graduate degree. You know, a graduate degree is how many years? Maybe 20 years of education. So what proportion of these different communities have achieved or passed through a 20-year of education? So that is an outcome measure. If you take that outcome measure and find out by caste or minority groups or ethnic groups, then you see the differentials. And what we find is in India, about 20% of the India's population are classified as high caste groups. And these high castes are all Hindu groups. High castes, those high castes, there are
of course, there are high caste Christians and high caste, of course, some Muslims also there. Yeah.
But we will come to that structure subsequently. But more within the Hindu community, the high caste have very high levels of outcome measures, for example, in education. And we can do this for income levels also. We can do this access to any major credit or finance. We can do this analysis for any number of parameters, but here I'm talking of education. And the Dalit community, the SC, ST community within the Hindu.
What is SC and ST for someone watching this in Washington or in UK may not understand what is an SC and ST is. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. So because of the hierarchical caste system in India, Indian caste system, I told earlier that India has large number of castes, but those castes are stacked into a hierarchy. So the base is the massive number of, a kind of labor class people who do manual labor, scavenging work, cleaning, domestic help. You can name the kind of jobs which are in the earlier terminology was called Dalit community. And there are a few tribal communities who used to live in earlier the jungle or the rural outbacks. But now India is so populated, you find tribal communities also part of urban clusters.
But
But
the
they have
tribal community is
origin.
not, you mean to say the tribal community is not part of Hindus? Hindu
The
society?
tribal communities is now classified in the Indian censuses as a Hindu community.
But they are not.
Well, that is a sociological discourse which I am not doing here.
Okay.
But the Dalit also are out the Hindu Varna system. But the Dalit and tribals are both included into the larger Hindu majority community.
Okay.
But these Dalit who are now called scheduled castes and the tribals who are now called the scheduled tribes, they constitute approximately about 25, 1/4 or 1/3 of India's population. They are the downtrodden, they are low incomes, and their outcome measures are very, very low.
Whereas they are low income because they have been kept outside of the economic activity of the caste society.
The social structure is such because these are all informal. These are all traditional occupations in India. Modern occupational jobs. Only about 12% of the Indian total labor force, which is about 700 million, only 12% of them are in organized sector employment in India.
Interesting.
So you have almost 88% of India's labor force is unorganized. These are small jobs, sometimes artisanal at the home level. Some are farmers who do their own cultivation. They own and do cultivation. There is no large-scale industrial type of farming in India, very limited. The average land holding size for a farmer is less than a hectare.
And that too only if they own a land. If there are
only
populations that don't
if
own
they
the
own a
land.
land.
Okay.
If they own a land, and they say, and that population. So these are all the downtrodden population. So India, to begin with, right at the time of independence, India had, at that time around 450 million population at the time of independence, about 3.5 million population, about 75% of the population were classified as below poverty line. What that means is that kind of population, 360-70 million.
That's about 75 years ago.
Which they had difficulty in eking out a living, day-to-day food requirement. It was very difficult there and they were at the risk of malnutrition. Even now, India has the largest malnourished population in any country in the world, particularly children.
Is that? I mean, lately we have been seeing numbers that India is shining and India is progressing.
India's total malnutrition today, the whole India number is more than the total malnourished population in the whole of African continent.
Wow.
The total.
That's not the image we get in Washington about India, do we?
Well, you better try to learn India, what real India is. Don't think of few IT boys who fly between India and USA. They don't represent Indian population, although they are very important boys and girls for us. But the true India is different. So one has to understand what is true India. Where do they live? So India is a very complex country, right? So when the distribution of public resources is a matter of importance to eliminate poverty, then what we see is that there is a huge leakage and a large number of minorities here, the ethnic groups, religious groups, and then the Dalits, and then the scheduled caste, they have difficulty in accessing these public services. As a matter of constitutional right, the Dalit, the scheduled caste, and the tribals, the scheduled tribes, as a matter of constitutional provision, they have a preferential access to resources. For example,
so more like a affirmative.
It is more than the affirmative. It is a quota system.
Okay.
Whereas those benefits are not extended to about 20% of the population who are categorized as minorities, who are who are non-Hindu religious communities, particularly Christians and Muslims. So the important point here which you need to understand is that the Indian Christians and the Indian Muslims, the Christians, they are the converted people from within the population. They are not the migrants from the Western world or the Christian world. And the Muslims are not entirely the migrants from the Middle Eastern areas where Muslim community emerged. But these are the people, because of the historical reasons, these are the people of India who have Indian genetics, who are Indian by birth, and they got converted historically into Christianity and Islam, and they continue to profess that religion. And they must have a choice to profess that religion according to the Indian Constitution even after independence. And the Indian Constitution also says that based on religion and of course even caste, you cannot discriminate. But now today we see a blatant discrimination against the Abrahamic religions in India.
But coming back to our human index question, human development index question, how do you...
One statistics which I will give you today is Indian Institute of Management is some of the world's best known institutions India has created. Similarly, Indian Institute of Technologies, these are all very old, 60, 70-year-old institutions, and they have left a very important important identity in the global education scene. If somebody says there are boys who are educated in IIT Mumbai, IIT Delhi, they apply for an admission in American universities, they know that these are very good educational institutions in India. So if you take, let us say, 1,000 boys and girls, 1,000 students from these premier institutions, what you will find approximately is about 80% of those students will belong to what in India now we classify as high caste Hindu communities. 80%. Whereas in the population, their share is about 20%. So in the population, the share of the high castes is 20%, but in the premium educational institutions, medical schools, management schools, technology institutions, their share is about 80%. Now come back to the minority communities, which are approximately about 20%. Their presence in these institutions will be between 5 and 6%. For example, for every 100 students we have, you may find 1 or 2 Muslims and 2 or 3 Christians.
Well, is that not the represent? I mean, in case of Muslims, you have a larger representation in the population, but in terms of for Christians, is that not the population, the percentage of population that the Christian community has? I mean, would that not be proportional representation in a classroom?
Yeah, the Christian community, in India, due to the legacy of being the rulers, the British Raj, and also the importance given to education, most of the cherished schools at the lower level in India are run by Christians and the Christian missionary. They'll call convent schools. So in those convent schools, the Christians have a preferred educational access. Because of that process, the Christians are in a better footing to compete into getting into higher level education. However, the Muslims, who constitute about 15% of India's population, they don't have the benefit at the moment all over India of...
Yet you do have Muslim institutions,
No,
schools
that
and
is only
colleges run by Muslim boards.
that is only in a couple of states in Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala, but not in India. So they don't have access to these kind of...
You mean to say in places like Uttar Pradesh and Gujarat, you don't have Waqf boards running schools and colleges?
No, there are no minority. They are Muslim managed schools. They don't exist there. For example, Assam, Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, zero. Very few. They're not there. So it is only the southern states where the minority educational institution policy was well implemented in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So the Muslims are not well represented in higher level education. They are 1 to 2%, 3% is very rare. Whereas their population share is 15%. So that is the reason why Muslims will qualify in India for a quota system or a high level of affirmative action system. And because
you are arguing that this impact the Human Development Index.
That impact the Human Development Index by different communities. So today, historically, it was considered that the Dalit community is the most underprivileged, most illiterate. That was about 20 years ago. So now, relatively speaking, what you see is because of the affirmative action policies for the Dalit and scheduled caste communities, the outcome measures of primary level education, middle and metric level, we call metric level education for about 10 years of education, the share of Dalits is more than the share of Muslims. It was somewhere around the turn of this century, the Dalit community's education levels are going proportionately more than the Muslim community. Earlier, Muslim community used to be the higher, but now the Dalit community is going up and the Muslim community is going down. That means more recent years.
But is it all across the board?
It is all across India, excepting a few Muslim concentrations in Andhra Pradesh, for example, because Andhra Pradesh Muslims are concentrated wholly in Hyderabad, larger Hyderabad area, where the education levels of Muslims is slightly higher than the Dalits. But they are now in no way competing with the high caste anyway, or the middle caste, right? So the Muslims, last 20 years, approximately after Sachar Committee was a committee to understand the structure of education and economic deprivation and social deprivation in India. A committee was established by the then Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh, under the Congress rule. That the committee's report was submitted in 2007. And there were a number of policies, a few good policies were implemented, which targeted the Muslim community to see that they get somewhat higher level of access to bank credit, to school admissions. There's some motivation. the motivational incentives, monetary incentives were given for children to go to school. And some of these policies were put up to encourage Muslim participation.
And this commission, the report that you are talking about, is primarily set up to study the Human Development Index of the Muslims in India.
Muslims,
number about 200 million now.
200 million, the Human Development Index of Muslims in comparison to other comparable groups.
Okay. So that means, you authored that report.
Yeah, I happen to be one of the chief architect of that report. It was written under a committee set up, and I was the executive secretary of that, and I put up the report for the committee. And after the committee approved, it went to the parliament, it went to the prime minister, and it became a public document.
And how does it would now, coming back to the equal employment opportunity or equal opportunity commission that you are talking about,
two of the recommendations in that was, the first was, the whole report suggested that there is a systemic bias against the Muslim community in India. Christians were not part of.
I'm not sure if general public would agree with that kind of.
They may not agree, but the whole report, every chapter and every table of data suggests that. You take any data available from any page, some 300-page report, some 100 different variables measured in there, you will see the Muslims accepting in one or two places, which I will tell you later, sex ratio, and sex ratio is the only place. Sex ratio means the number of females for 100 men, which was better among Muslims, and infant mortality rate, which is lower among Muslims compared to Hindus. But for these two variables, in all variables, the Muslims were at the bottom.
I mean, bottom means if it's below the Dalit community even?
In education, they are below the Dalits. But in poverty, in employment access, in some of these, they are just competing around there. It is in the same band.
So you mean to say that even without education, the Muslim community, particularly in India, are able to economically excel or economically compete and be better off than those their counterparts who have an education from the Dalit community? Is that your
point? That is one interpretation. See, minority community anywhere in the world, they have better productivity levels. You go to England, for example, there is a study in England. I have not seen that kind of study in USA yet. The minority community in England, however the English people define in England.
Well, the immigrant community mostly.
However they define, their productivity is higher than the natives.
Yes, I could see that. Yeah.
Okay. Now that is a kind of
colloquially.
Hold on. That is a kind of natural, in an environment where you are a minority, to sustain yourselves, you have to work harder.
Yes, and that's what in
so
New
York. That happens.
New York
Yeah, that happens to Muslims in India too. Yeah, it is often said here in US also that South Asian, particularly Indian, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, and also Chinese, their average incomes are higher than the national average.
That is true. But mainly that is contributing. The contributing factor on that is education, levels of education, and the kinds of jobs that they are landing. Naturally puts them above the average, yes.
About the average. So the Muslims being the minority, to counter the systemic bias around, they had to work harder. But that is not enough to come out of poverty. And hold on. And while the new income growth is taking place in India, India is a growing economy. So the fruits of the new growth, the new income levels is percolating to people all over the country, but it is being cornered off by the high caste Hindu community. It is not percolating down as much to the Muslim community. But for the Dalit community, there is a quota system, and through that quota system, the government tries to give protection, and through that process, there is a growth even among the Dalit community. But it is only the Muslim community, 15% of the total population, which is excluded.
Where do the Christians and Zoroastrians fit in this equation?
Yeah. See, the issue about Christians, Zoroastrians, Jains, Sikhs, and
Well, Jains and Sikhs are Indic, if you will.
Yeah, no. I'm giving one more dimension to it.
Uh-huh.
So India is having 1.4 billion people. So the Christian community is about 3% of the total population. The Jains are about 1.5% of the, although Jainism emerged in India, but it never stayed in India, only 3% lived.
Well, it was a dominant faith. There's a different subject.
Yeah, that's a
dominant
different
faith
issue.
At one time, but that was destroyed by the resurgence
that is
of.
A different issue.
Yeah,
that is a different issue. Let us not mix that up.
Mm-hmm.
So Christians are 3%. Jains are about 1.5%. Buddhist is the religion which evolved in India.
Mm-hmm.
Now only about less than 2% of the population is Buddhist, in spite of massive conversion after Ambedkar's leadership. Even after that, only about 2% of India's population is Buddhist, and only about 3%, 3.5% of the total population is Sikh. It is only the Muslim community, which is 15% of the total India's population, which is about 200 million. So 80% of the total minorities in India are Muslims. 15% of the total population in India are Muslims. And Muslims are spread out in almost all parts of India. For example, in Assam, their share is about 30%. In Bengal, their share is about 27%. In Bihar, their share is about 20%. In UP, where elections are going, their share is about 17%. Kerala, Muslim share is about 30%. So Maharashtra, it is about 12%. Gujarat, it is about 11%. So Muslims are present all over India in a certain respectable number, so to speak, large numbers. And Christian community is a kind of found in Kerala and Tamil Nadu a bit, and then in Northeast, and their presence in UP, Bihar, for example, is probably 0.5%. Madhya Pradesh.
But there is some Gujarat, and not Gujarat. Gujarat, there is some, but I think there is some substantial population in Punjab.
And these are small areas, small locations. So Christians are present in small locations, but Muslims are present everywhere. So today's discriminatory issue is, in the Indian political context, it is the Muslims, about 200 million. Within Muslims, there is a hierarchy. It doesn't matter you are rich or poor. Everybody is suffering from that bias.
But your recommendation, the Equal Opportunity Commission that you wanted to set up, is not necessarily Muslim-centric, is it?
Yeah.
Or is it?
So one of the two recommendations which were given is to remove systemic bias. We had to analyze the institutions which India has. The systemic bias will evolve from a number of different varieties of institutions, like colleges, like departments, like railways, like banks, like army, like police, whatever. These are all departments and institutions where their representation is very low. Schools and colleges, their representation is very low, and there seem to be a systematic bias working. Now, see, Indian Institute of Management has annual intake of, let us say, 200 people. And if approximately 15% of 200 will be 30 boys and girls who must be Muslims, according to me. And nobody can say that out of India's 200 million population, you cannot get 30 intelligent boys and girls from Muslim community.
And then where does the Dalits fit in here?
Yeah, Dalits have a assured entry into the system. They get 30% entry without any effort, because it must be filled by the Dalit and SC community. So they come in through the quota system.
So your argument is that only the Christians
that is the reason why Sachar Committee suggested that we have to develop a kind of diversity index for each IIM, each IIT, each department. And through the process of that diversity index, once you review diversity annually, and you provide an incentive structure so that the institutional bias is reduced, and the kind of incentives are provided where equal opportunity and level playing field is provided to all communities, including Muslims.
Okay, your point well taken. Now, here is my question. What does it matter to Washington? Why is it in long term? Why should Washington why should Washington think about this particular very specific and very detailed scenario that you have laid out? What does it matter to Washington?
There are two strong reasons why a country like United States should look into it. I'll give two. There are multiple, but at the moment, I want to conclude by stating these 2 points for today's discussion. American value system is the torchbearer of bringing democracy and equality in the world. So the America should carry its value system.
Well, hold on.
You have to first understand my view.
Sure.
To carry its value system through extending democratic values around the globe, and that is the mission of US.
Well, that's only when it's convenient for us, but not necessarily. Yeah, because American foreign policy, Dr. Sharif, American foreign policy is strictly based on America's interest, economic and strategic interest.
So I'm coming to that. I'm coming to I'm giving link to that American.
Sure.
Interest. So it is the value system, the American democratic value system. And importantly, it can be done through the massive investments that America wants to implant in India, future partnerships being developed. I think the issue of equal opportunity has to be very strongly factored in their contracts, number one. Number two, see, America as a country has evolved and developed through massive migration. And as a demographer and economist, the next 2 to 3 decades of migration will be dominant by the South Asian economies. I know previously they have been from Latin America, the Hispanics, there have been the Chinese, but both the Latin American and the Chinese migrants are going through huge demographic population, contraction. So in the next 2-3 decades, fewer children, fewer youth, and fewer working age people are available from these locations for American economy. So it is only the South Asian economy and parts of Africa that you are going to source the migrants who will be helping the American corporates, American industry, American businesses, and therefore US is going to have preferential migration policies from South Asia. And now, at the moment, if you take
even
one minute, sir, one minute. If you take this migrants from India, for example, so far, if you take some sort of census, you will see that 80 to 90, I would say even more than 90% of the total migrants from India will be from high caste. And out of those
so
high
what
caste,
does it matter? How does it impact us economically?
Because it is a matter of social justice.
Well, social justice,
that is what America is the torch bearer of social justice.
Well, it's a lofty idea, but practically speaking, that doesn't make any economic, it doesn't threaten America's economic interest. So why should America worry about it?
Because India is likely to face huge social turmoil and huge domestic, what you call, a kind of revolution will take place.
There you got it. That would be
where you can't even invest in India anymore if these situations continue in India for a long time.
So this kind of a social gap is perpetuated. There could be civil unrest on the ground in India
it is beginning to already take place. You know, you have seen the farmers issue, you have seen the CAA, you have seen the students. All these are showing towards a kind of domestic turmoil, which is concocting right now.
And you are arguing that is not good for America's future and America's economic interest in South Asia.
That is not good for India, and through India, not for good for American future as well.
There you have it. Thank you, Dr. Sharif, for your enlightening insight into this particular issue. And this discussion could continue in the Facebook and in other social media platforms. And if you can, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you. Thank you again.
Thank you again. Right.